The invitation came in a cream envelope, embossed with the words, "Williams Family Reunion." I traced my fingers over the raised lettering, a smile playing at my lips. After 62 years on this earth, family had become more precious than ever, especially since Harold's passing 3 years ago. I set the invitation on my kitchen table and poured myself a cup of tea. The reunion was being organized by my son Michael and his wife Veronica. It would be held at Silver Lake Park, where Harold and I had taken Michael fishing every summer. A perfect location, filled with memories. The last paragraph of the invitation mentioned a family photo session at Bellamy Studios downtown. A keepsake to treasure for generations, it said. I made a note on my calendar, circling the date in red. My house felt especially quiet that evening. I wandered from room to room, straightening picture frames that didn't need straightening. After 40 years in this house, I'd developed routines to fill the silence. I paused at my favorite photo of Michael's graduation. Harold stood tall and proud, his arm around our son's shoulders. I was on Michael's other side, beaming with motherly pride. That night, I dreamed of Harold. We were young again, dancing in our first apartment, the one with the leaky faucet and the window that wouldn't quite close. I woke with tears on my cheeks, but a lightness in my heart. The week before the reunion, I called Michael to confirm the details. "Everything's on track, Mom," he said, his voice warm. "Veronica's handling the catering. We've got about 50 people confirmed. And the photo session, should I wear something specific?" There was a slight pause. "About that, Mom, Veronica was thinking we might do several groupings for the photos." "That makes sense," I said. "The whole extended family, and then maybe just immediate families." "Right." Another pause. "For the main portrait, Veronica was thinking just us and the kids." It took me a moment to understand what he wasn't saying. "You mean you, Veronica, Emma, and Jake?" I asked, naming my grandchildren. "Well, yes. Veronica feels it would be more balanced that way. Her parents aren't with us anymore, so—" The unspoken message hung in the air between us. I was being excluded from the main family portrait because I was the only grandparent left. "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the sudden tightness in my chest. "That's fine, Michael. You'll be in plenty of other photos, Mom. The group shots, and maybe some with just you and the grandkids." "Of course," I said. "Whatever Veronica thinks is best." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the invitation, balanced. That was the word Michael had used. As if my presence would somehow throw off the visual symmetry of their perfect family. I thought of all the times I'd welcomed Veronica into our home, how I'd taught her Harold's secret recipe for blueberry pancakes because they were Michael's favorite, how I'd watched their children when they needed a weekend away, how I'd stepped back and given them space to build their own family traditions, even when it meant spending some holidays alone. The hurt crystallized into something harder as the day wore on. By evening, I found myself pulling out photo albums, flipping through pages of family history. There I was, holding newborn Michael. There was Harold, teaching him to ride a bike. There we were, a family through decades of birthdays, graduations, weddings. Family wasn't about symmetry, it was about connection, about the invisible threads that bound generations together. The reunion was on Saturday and the photo session was scheduled for Friday afternoon. I spent Thursday cleaning my house from top to bottom, an old habit when I felt unsettled. By evening, every surface gleamed, and my hands smelled of lemon polish and bleach. I called my friend Dorothy, who listened patiently as I explained the situation. "That's ridiculous," she said flatly. "You're his mother, for heaven's sake." "Veronica has always been particular about appearances," I said, trying to be fair. "And I suppose I understand wanting a photo of just their immediate family." "Then they should take that in addition to the family portrait, not instead of it," Dorothy countered. "Martha, you need to speak up." But I wasn't sure I could. Confrontation had never been my strong suit, and I'd spent decades prioritizing family harmony over my own feelings. That night, I dreamed of Harold again. We were sitting on our back porch, watching fireflies blink in the summer twilight. "Don't let them erase you, Marty," he said, using his old nickname for me. "You deserve to be seen." I woke with his words echoing in my mind. You deserve to be seen. Friday arrived with perfect early summer weather. I dressed carefully in a blue dress that Harold had always loved, applied a touch of lipstick, and drove downtown to Bellamy Studios. The building was an old converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and tall windows. A young woman at the reception desk checked my name against a list. "The Williams family reunion? They're in Studio 3 down the hall to your right." I could hear voices as I approached Michael's deep laugh, Veronica's precise instructions, the excited chatter of my grandchildren. I paused outside the door, smoothing my dress, gathering my courage. The studio was larger than I'd expected, with professional lighting equipment and various backdrop options. Michael spotted me first. "Mom, you're right on time." He came over to kiss my cheek. Veronica was speaking with the photographer, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and glasses. My grandchildren, Emma and Jake, were sitting on stools, looking bored in their dressy clothes. "Grandma!" Jake, 10 years old and full of energy, jumped off his stool and ran to hug me. Emma, 14 and increasingly conscious of her dignity, followed more sedately. "Hi, Grandma. You look nice." "Thank you, sweetheart. You both look very grown up." Veronica finished her conversation with the photographer and turned to me with a practiced smile. "Martha, you're here. Wonderful. We're just getting started with the immediate family shots first." There it was, the subtle dismissal. I was not immediate family. "Actually," the photographer said, extending his hand to me, "I don't believe we've met. I'm Daniel Bellamy, the owner." "Martha Williams," I said, shaking his hand. "Michael's mother." "Pleasure to meet you. We'll be doing various groupings today, as I understand it." Veronica stepped in smoothly. "Yes, we'll start with just the four of us, then add extended family as they arrive." I saw Michael glance at me apologetically, but he said nothing. As I sat down, I watched Daniel arrange my son, his wife, and my grandchildren against a neutral backdrop. They made a handsome picture, Michael tall like his father, Veronica elegant in a cream-colored dress, the children looking like perfect miniatures of their parents. "Beautiful family," Daniel commented as he adjusted his camera. "Now, Mom and Dad in the middle, kids on either side. Perfect." Mom and Dad. I felt a pang, remembering when those terms referred to Harold and me. Daniel took several shots, directing small adjustments in posture and expression. "Great. Now, how about some with Grandma?" Veronica's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We'll do those later, with the extended family shots." Actually, I heard myself say, "I'd like to be in a photo with my grandchildren now, if that's all right." The room went quiet. Michael looked uncomfortable, but Daniel seemed oblivious to the tension. "Of course," he said cheerfully. "Kids, why don't you pose with your grandmother?" Emma and Jake came over willingly enough. I stood between them, placing a gentle hand on each of their shoulders. "Lovely," Daniel said, snapping several photos. "The resemblance is clear. Those Williams eyes carry through the generations." It was true. My grandchildren had the same deep blue eyes that Harold had, that Michael had inherited, that I'd fallen in love with decades ago. "Now," Daniel continued, "how about one with the whole family? Mom and Dad, join in please." I saw Veronica open her mouth to object, but Michael moved quickly to stand beside me. "Great idea," he said, giving his wife a look I couldn't quite interpret. Veronica hesitated, then took her place on the other side of the children. The five of us stood together, a complete family portrait. As Daniel continued taking photos, I felt a strange mix of emotions: vindication that I was included, sadness that it had been an issue at all, and a growing determination that I would not allow myself to be sidelined in my own family. After the session, as we were preparing to leave, Daniel approached me. "Mrs. Williams, I hope you don't mind my saying, but you have a remarkable presence on camera. Very photogenic." "Thank you," I said, surprised by the compliment. My husband always said I had a face that lit up in front of a camera. He was right. Daniel glanced around the studio. "I've been doing this for 30 years. Started as an assistant right out of high school, worked my way up, eventually bought the place when old Mr. Grimshaw retired." "It's a lovely studio," I said. "It is, but I'm thinking of retiring myself soon. My kids aren't interested in taking over the business." He handed me his card. "If you ever want to do a proper portrait session, just for yourself, give me a call. Senior portraits aren't just for teenagers, you know." I tucked the card into my purse, oddly touched by the suggestion. The family reunion the next day was a blur of activity: cousins I hadn't seen in years, children I barely recognized, food and conversation, and the comfortable chaos of family gatherings. I found myself watching Michael and Veronica, noting how they moved through the crowd as a unit, how she subtly directed his attention, how he deferred to her decisions. Had I been that way with Harold? I didn't think so. We'd been partners, each with our own strengths, neither dominating the other. When the proofs from the photo session arrived by email the following week, I scrolled through them with mixed emotions. The family portrait, all five of us, had turned out beautifully. But there were more photos of just Michael, Veronica, and the children than there were of me with any combination of family members. I printed the family portrait and placed it on my mantle, next to the photo from Michael's graduation, past and present, side by side. That evening, I found Daniel Bellamy's card in my purse and, on impulse, called the number. "Bellamy Studios," he answered. "Mr. Bellamy, this is Martha Williams. We met last week at my family's photo session." "Mrs. Williams, of course. Please call me Daniel." "Then you must call me Martha. I was wondering, you mentioned senior portraits." "Yes, absolutely. It's something I've been promoting lately, professional portraits to celebrate life's later chapters. Are you interested?" I surprised myself by saying yes. We scheduled a session for the following week. I spent days considering what to wear, eventually selecting a deep purple dress I'd bought years ago for a charity event with Harold but had never worn. Too bold, I'd thought at the time. Now it seemed just right. The portrait session was unlike anything I'd experienced. Daniel took his time, asking me questions about my life as he worked, drawing out stories about Harold, about raising Michael, about my 25-year career as a librarian. "People think photographers just capture images," he said as he adjusted his equipment. "But what we really do is capture essence. Who are you, Martha Williams? That's what I want these photos to show." By the end of the 2-hour session, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. Not as someone's mother or grandmother or widow, but as myself, Martha, 62 years of life experience, still very much present. When the portraits arrived, I was stunned. Daniel had captured something in my eyes that I recognized from long ago: a spark, a strength, a certainty. I looked like myself, but somehow more so. I called to thank him. "These are remarkable, Daniel. I hardly know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Your expression in those photos says it all." He paused. "Martha, I mentioned I'm considering retirement. The truth is, I've been looking for someone to take over the studio, someone who understands what we really do here." "I'm sure you'll find the right person," I said. "Actually, I was wondering if you might be interested in coming on as a partner. Your background in library science gives you the organizational skills, and you clearly have an eye for composition. I could teach you the technical aspects." I was speechless. "I know it sounds out of the blue," he continued, "but I've learned to trust my instincts about people. Think about it. No need to decide right away." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house, considering his offer. It was absurd, of course. I knew nothing about running a photography studio. I was 62 years old, settled into my routines, my widow's life. But then, I looked at the portrait Daniel had taken at the woman with a direct gaze and the hint of a smile, the woman who refused to be erased from her family's image, the woman who still had stories to tell. I thought about the photo studio, about the families who came through its doors, about the moments captured and preserved. I thought about being behind the camera instead of in front of it, about helping others see themselves clearly. I picked up the phone and called Michael. "Mom, everything okay?" he asked. "Everything's fine. I just wanted to let you know I'm considering a new venture, a business partnership." "A business? What kind of business?" I took a deep breath. "A photography studio, actually, Bellamy Studios downtown." There was a long pause. "The place where we had our family photos taken. Mom, you don't know anything about photography." "I can learn," I said simply. "Daniel, Mr. Bellamy thinks I have potential." "Mom, this sounds like, I don't know, a midlife crisis or something." I laughed. "I'm well past midlife, Michael. This is something else entirely." "Does this have anything to do with the family photos? Because if you're upset about that—" "It's not about the photos," I interrupted, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "It's about me deciding what comes next in my life." After we hung up, I stood at my living room window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Harold and I used to sit on the porch every evening to watch this same sky. He would have supported this decision, I was certain. The next morning, I called Daniel. "I'd like to discuss your offer," I said. "Perhaps over lunch." "I'd like that very much," he replied. As I hung up, I caught sight of my reflection in the hallway mirror. I stood a little straighter, my eyes a little brighter. The woman in Daniel's portrait stared back at me, ready for whatever came next. The bell above the door chimed as I entered Bellamy Studios the following Tuesday. The space felt different now that I was considering it as a potential business partner rather than a customer. I noticed details I'd missed before: the slightly worn carpet near the reception desk, the outdated computer system, the faded sample portraits on the walls. Daniel emerged from the back room, camera in hand, his face lighting up when he saw me. While I waited, I browsed the portfolio books displayed in the reception area. Daniel's work spanned decades: wedding portraits from the 80s with their distinctive soft-focus style, corporate headshots from the 90s, modern family portraits with natural outdoor settings. Through it all, I could see his talent for capturing genuine expressions, those fleeting moments of authentic emotion. A young couple emerged from Studio 2, thanking Daniel profusely for their engagement photos. I watched how he interacted with them, warm but professional, taking a genuine interest in their wedding plans. "Ready?" he asked once they'd left. We walked to a small cafe 2 blocks from the studio. Over sandwiches and iced tea, Daniel laid out his proposal. "I've owned Bellamy Studios for 27 years, he explained. "Built it from a one-man operation into what it is today. But I'm 68 now, and while I'm not ready to fully retire, I'd like to scale back." "And you think I could help run it?" I still couldn't quite believe he was serious. "I do. The technical aspects of photography can be taught. What can't be taught is people skills, business sense, and the ability to see beyond the surface." He leaned forward. "You have those qualities, Martha." "Based on one photo session?" I smiled skeptically. "Based on how you handled yourself during that session, how you spoke about your family, how you responded to my direction." He took a sip of tea. "And frankly, based on the fact that you're here now, considering a completely new direction at 62. I considered his words. It would be a significant investment. It would. I'm proposing a 3-year transition. You'd buy in as a junior partner. I'd teach you everything I know, and gradually you'd take over more of the business. By the end, you'd have the option to buy me out completely or continue as partners with me in a reduced role. The financial details he outlined were substantial, but not impossible. Harold had left me well provided for, between his life insurance and our investments. I'd been living modestly, with no real plan for the money beyond eventually leaving it to Michael and the grandchildren. I'd need to think about it, I said finally. Consult with my financial advisor. Of course, take all the time you need. Daniel smiled. In the meantime, how would you feel about shadowing me for a few days? Get a feel for the business before you decide. That seemed reasonable. We arranged for me to come in Thursday and Friday that week. As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities. I'd worked as a librarian until taking early retirement at 55 to care for Harold during his illness. I'd loved that work organizing information, helping people find what they needed, creating order from chaos. Perhaps those skills would translate to running a business. Michael called that evening. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about the photography studio. His tone was cautious. Are you sure this is what you want? I'm exploring the possibility, I said. I'm going to shadow Daniel for a few days this week, see what the business actually entails. It just seems so unexpected. Photography has never been your thing. No, but organizing information, helping people, running systems, those were my thing for 25 years at the library. I paused. Michael, I need something meaningful to do with this chapter of my life. I understand that, but a business partnership is a huge commitment. What about volunteering or travel? Veronica's mother joined a seniors tour group after her father passed. I bit back a sharp response. I'm not Veronica's mother. I'm not looking for distraction. I'm looking for purpose. There was a long silence. I just don't want to see you make a mistake, Mom, or get taken advantage of. I appreciate your concern. I really do. But I need you to trust that I can make sound decisions for myself. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, making lists of questions to ask Daniel, researching photography businesses online, and sketching out potential financial scenarios. By midnight, I had filled several pages with notes. It felt good to exercise my mind this way again, to grapple with a complex problem. Thursday morning, I arrived at Bellamy Studios at 8:30, half an hour before opening. Daniel was already there, preparing for the day. First rule of photography, he said as he handed me a mug of coffee, is preparation. Most of what makes a great portrait happens before the client ever arrives. He showed me how he reviewed each day's appointments, researching returning clients to recall personal details, setting up equipment specific to each session's needs, and preparing the studio space. People are nervous in front of the camera, he explained. My job is to make them forget it's there. That starts with creating an environment where they feel comfortable and recognized. Throughout the day, I observed sessions with various clients, a family with 3 rambunctious children, a nervous executive needing corporate headshots, an elderly couple celebrating their 50th anniversary. Daniel had a different approach for each, adapting his manner and technique to put them at ease. Between clients, he showed me the business side scheduling software, pricing structures, vendor relationships for printing and framing, marketing strategies. The industry has changed dramatically, he admitted. Digital photography, online sharing, smartphones with decent cameras, they've all cut into traditional studio business. We've had to adapt, focus on what people can't get from a selfie. By the end of the day, my head was spinning with new information, but I felt exhilarated rather than overwhelmed. This was complex, challenging work that made use of both technical skills and emotional intelligence. Friday followed a similar pattern, but Daniel had me take a more active role greeting clients, assisting with lighting setups, even suggesting poses for a mother-daughter portrait session. "You have good instincts," he said afterward. "You noticed their natural dynamic and worked with it instead of forcing them into standard poses." Late that afternoon, as we were reviewing the day's work on his computer, the bell chimed. I looked up to see Veronica standing in the reception area, looking polished as always in a tailored blazer and slim trousers. "Mrs. Reynolds," Daniel greeted her, using her professional name. Veronica had kept her maiden name for her work as a real estate agent. "What brings you in today?" "I was hoping to speak with you about using some of our family portraits for my new marketing materials." Her eyes flickered to me, surprise evident. "Martha, I didn't expect to see you here." "I've been learning about the business," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Daniel's been kind enough to show me the ropes." Veronica looked between us, clearly confused. "The business?" Daniel stepped in smoothly. "Martha's considering coming on as a partner at the studio. She has an excellent eye." "A partner?" Veronica's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "How interesting." "It's still in the exploratory phase," I said. "Of course." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, I won't interrupt your exploration. Perhaps we could discuss my marketing needs another time, Mr. Bellamy." "Certainly. Why don't you call next week to set up an appointment?" After Veronica left, Daniel turned to me with a questioning look. That seemed tense. I sighed. Veronica is my daughter-in-law. She's the one who wanted to exclude me from the main family portrait. Understanding dawned on his face. "Ah, and now you're considering buying into the very studio where that happened." "It's not about revenge," I said quickly, though a small part of me acknowledged the satisfaction I'd felt at her surprise. "This is about finding something meaningful for myself." "Of course," he said, but there was a knowing glint in his eye. That evening, Veronica called. I had been expecting it. "Martha," she began without preamble, "Michael tells me you're seriously considering investing in Bellamy Studios." "I am," I confirmed. "Don't you think that's a rather impulsive decision? Photography isn't exactly your background." "It just seems like an unusual choice, and frankly, the timing makes it seem rather reactive." I took a deep breath. "If you're suggesting this has something to do with the family portrait situation, I can assure you my interest in the studio is about finding a new direction for myself." "Of course," she said in the same tone she'd used at the studio. "I just wouldn't want to see you make a significant financial commitment based on emotional factors." "I appreciate your concern," I said evenly, "but I'm capable of making sound business decisions." After we hung up, I paced my living room, irritation building. First Michael, now Veronica Both, treating me as if I were a child making an impulsive choice rather than a grown woman with decades of life experience. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, Frank, who had worked with Harold and me for 20 years. "A photography studio," he repeated after I explained the situation. "That's certainly different from your previous investments." "I know, but I've been looking for something meaningful to do, and this opportunity presented itself." Frank asked detailed questions about the business revenue streams, expenses, growth potential, competition. I was pleased to find I could answer most of them based on my 2 days with Daniel. "It's not the safest investment," Frank concluded, "but it's not unreasonable given your overall financial picture. You could allocate the funds Daniel is asking for without jeopardizing your long-term security. And as a business decision, setting aside the personal aspects, small businesses always carry risk, but photography studios have relatively low overhead once established. The value is primarily in the reputation and client base, which this one has. If you're actively involved and can maintain or grow that client base, it could be viable. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a growing certainty about my decision. Sunday dinner at Michael and Veronica's house had been a monthly tradition since Harold's passing. This Sunday, I arrived with my usual contribution of apple pie, but with an unusual sense of trepidation. Michael greeted me with a hug. "Mom, good to see you. The kids are in the backyard." I found Emma and Jake playing badminton, their faces flushed with exertion and the early summer heat. "Grandma!" Jake abandoned the game to run over. "Dad says you're going to be a photographer now. Can you take pictures of my baseball team?" I laughed. "Not exactly a photographer, sweetheart, and I need to learn a lot more before taking on team photos." Emma approached more cautiously. "Are you really buying that photo studio, Grandma?" "I'm considering becoming a partner in the business," I clarified. "It would be a new challenge for me." "Cool," she said, with the casual approval of a teenager. "Most grandmas just, garden and stuff." Inside, Veronica was putting the finishing touches on dinara roast chicken with vegetables that filled the house with savory aromas. She nodded a greeting but seemed preoccupied. Throughout dinner, the conversation carefully avoided the topic of Bellamy Studios until Jake innocently brought it up again. "So if Grandma owns the photo place, do we get free pictures whenever we want?" Michael cleared his throat. "Mom hasn't made any decisions yet, buddy." "Actually," I said, setting down my fork, "I have. I've spoken with my financial advisor, and I'm going to accept Daniel's offer to become a partner in the studio." Silence fell over the table. Veronica's hand tightened around her water glass. "You're sure about this?" Michael asked finally. "I am. It's a sound business opportunity, and more importantly, it's something I want to do." "Well," he said after a moment, "then I'm happy for you, Mom. It'll be a big change, but maybe that's good." Veronica said nothing, but her disapproval was palpable. After dinner, while Michael and the children cleared the table, Veronica followed me into the kitchen as I went to cut the pie. "I hope you know what you're doing, Martha," she said quietly. "Running a business isn't like working in a library. It's competitive, demanding." "I'm aware of the challenges," I replied, keeping my voice level. "I'm not going into this naively." "And it doesn't bother you that people might think you're doing this out of other motivations?" I turned to face her directly. "What people think isn't my primary concern, Veronica. But for the record, this decision is about my future, not about any past disagreements." She held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "I hope it works out for you." The following week was a whirlwind of activity. I met with Daniel and his lawyer to draft partnership agreements, arranged for the transfer of funds, and began more intensive training in both the photography and business aspects of the studio. Daniel was a patient teacher, guiding me through the basics of camera operation, lighting techniques, and photo editing software. I discovered I had a natural eye for composition, though the technical aspects would take time to master. "You don't need to become an expert photographer overnight," Daniel assured me. "That's still my department for now. Focus on learning the business operations, client relations, and studio management." I threw myself into the work with an energy I hadn't felt in years. I organized the digital archive of client photos, streamlined the appointment scheduling system, and updated the studio's outdated website with the help of a young web designer Daniel recommended. One evening, as we were closing up the studio, Daniel asked, "Have you told your family about making it official?" "Yes," I said, thinking of the tense Sunday dinner. "My son is cautiously supportive. My daughter-in-law is less so." "The one who wanted to exclude you from the family portrait?" I nodded. "Does it bother you? Her disapproval?" I considered the question carefully. "It bothers me that she doesn't see me clearly, that she sees an aging mother-in-law making an impulsive decision rather than a capable woman starting a new chapter." "Well," Daniel said, locking the studio door behind us, Perhaps seeing you succeed in this venture will change her perspective. Perhaps, I agreed, though I wasn't convinced. Veronica had formed her opinion of me years ago, and it would take more than a business partnership to alter it. The following Saturday, I invited Dorothy over for coffee to share my news. She listened, wide-eyed, as I explained my new venture. "Martha Williams, you dark horse," she exclaimed when I finished. "A photography studio, who would have thought?" "Certainly not me, a month ago," I admitted. "It's all happened rather quickly." "But you seem excited about it, more animated than I've seen you since." She trailed off, not needing to specify since Harold. "I am excited, nervous but excited. It feels right, Dorothy, like this is what I'm supposed to do next." "Then I'm thrilled for you, and not a bit surprised that you're reinventing yourself at 62. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Harold would be proud." That comment brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Do you really think so?" "I know so. He always said you were the strongest person he knew, that you just didn't realize your own strength." I brushed away the tears, smiling. He exaggerated, but I am finding that I'm more capable than I sometimes give myself credit for. "Exactly. And this Bellamy fellow is he just a business partner, or?" "Dorothy," I felt my cheeks warm. "It's strictly professional. Daniel is a colleague and mentor, nothing more." She raised an eyebrow. "If you say so, but he's single, you mentioned?" "Widowed, like me. His wife passed away 5 years ago." I gave her a stern look. "And that's all I have to say on the matter." Dorothy laughed. "Fine, fine. But remember, business partnerships can be complicated enough without adding other dimensions." Her words stayed with me over the next few weeks as Daniel and I settled into our new arrangement. There was something comfortable about working with him, a mutual respect, a shared vision for the studio, an easy rapport that made even challenging days manageable. 1 month into our partnership, we landed a significant contract with a local private school for their student portraits and yearbook photos. It was a coup for the studio, which had been losing ground to cheaper chain photographers. "This is entirely thanks to your proposal," Daniel said as we celebrated with a glass of wine after hours. "Your background in education gave you insight into what the school administration really wanted." "It was a team effort," I insisted. "Your portfolio of previous schoolwork is what sealed the deal." "To team efforts then," he said, raising his glass to mine. As we clinked glasses, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the studio window, two silver-haired professionals, eyes bright with success, leaning toward each other slightly. For a moment, I saw us as others might, not just business partners, but potentially something more. I pushed the thought away quickly. Dorothy's warning echoed in my mind. Complications were the last thing I needed as I was finding my footing in this new venture. The school contract meant we needed to hire additional help for the busy season ahead. Daniel suggested his niece, Layla, a photography student at the local community college. "She's talented, eager to learn, and could use the experience," he explained. "And the extra income wouldn't hurt her either." Layla proved to be a delightful addition to the studio. 22 years old, with purple-tipped hair, multiple ear piercings, and an infectious enthusiasm for photography. She reminded me of myself at that age, before marriage and motherhood had channeled my energy into more conventional paths. "Mrs. Williams, you have to see this shot I got yesterday," she'd exclaim, pulling me over to the computer to show me a particularly successful portrait. Her excitement was a reminder of the creative joy at the heart of this business. I found myself looking forward to going to the studio each day, to the challenges and satisfactions of building something new, to the interactions with clients, to Daniel's steady presence and Layla's youthful energy. 6 weeks into our partnership, Michael stopped by the studio unexpectedly. "I was in the neighborhood for a meeting," he explained, looking around with interest. "Thought I'd see this new venture of yours firsthand." I gave him a tour, introducing him to Daniel and Layla, showing him the improvements we'd made to the space, explaining the school contract, and our plans for expanding the senior portrait business. "I'm impressed, Mom," he said as we stood in Studio 1, where I'd replaced the outdated backdrop with a more modern, textured option. "You seem to really know what you're doing here." "I'm learning every day," I admitted. "But yes, I think I've found my footing." Michael's expression grew serious. "I owe you an apology. I wasn't very supportive at first. I was worried this was some kind of reaction to being excluded from the family portrait," I supplied. He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Among other things, I should have stood up for you more with Veronica." "Water under the bridge," I said, though the hurt hadn't entirely faded. "What matters is that I found something that challenges and fulfills me." "I can see that," he smiled. "Dad would get a kick out of this, you know. You as a photography studio owner." "Partner," I corrected automatically, then smiled. "But yes, I think he would." As Michael was leaving, he paused at the door. "Mom, would you consider taking new family portraits for us? All of us together, the way it should be." The simple request and the recognition behind it meant more than he could know. "I'd be honored," I said, "though Daniel will have to handle the actual photography for now. I'm still learning." After he left, I stood in the reception area, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. There was vindication, yes, that my son now understood the importance of including me in the family's visual history. But there was also a new confidence that had nothing to do with family dynamics and everything to do with what I was building here, in this studio, in this unexpected new chapter of my life. Daniel found me still standing there, lost in thought. "Everything okay with your son's visit?" he asked. "Yes," I said, turning to him with a smile. "Everything is finally starting to fall into place." 3 months into my partnership at Bellamy Studios, I'd settled into a comfortable routine. Mornings were spent handling administrative tasks, reviewing appointments, managing finances, coordinating with vendors. Afternoons were dedicated to client sessions, with Daniel handling the photography while I managed the client experience. I was slowly learning the technical aspects of photography, though I still consider myself very much a novice behind the camera. The studio was thriving under our partnership. Our bookings had increased by 20%, partly due to the school contract, but also because of the word of mouth generated by our more personalized approach. I'd implemented a follow-up system, contacting clients after their sessions to ensure satisfaction and encourage referrals. "You've revolutionized our business model," Daniel remarked one evening as we reviewed the monthly numbers. "I was focused on the art. You've balanced it with sound business practices." "Library science is all about systems," I explained. "Organizing information, tracking patterns, anticipating needs. It's not so different from managing a business." We were working late, sharing Chinese takeout in the small office behind the reception area. These after-hours strategy sessions had become a regular occurrence, something I looked forward to more than I cared to admit. "Speaking of anticipating needs," Daniel said, reaching for the last spring roll, "I've been thinking about expanding our services. Digital photography has changed the industry. People want more than just traditional portraits now." "What did you have in mind?" "Photo restoration and archiving. Many of our older clients have boxes of deteriorating family photos. We could offer to digitize, restore, and organize them into albums or digital collections." The idea resonated with me immediately. "That's brilliant. It combines preservation with storytell, creating a visual family history." "Exactly. And with your background in organizing information." "It would be perfect," I agreed. "We could start with a small marketing campaign targeting our existing client base, especially those who've come in for multi-generational portraits." We spent the next hour sketching out the new service, energized by the possibilities. It was nearly 9 o'clock when we finally closed up the studio. "Can I walk you to your car?" Daniel offered, as he always did. The parking lot was dark, illuminated only by a single streetlight. As we walked, Daniel's hand brushed against mine accidentally at first, then deliberately as his fingers gently clasped mine. I felt a flutter of surprise, followed by a warmth that spread up my arm. We reached my car in silence, our hands still joined. I turned to face him, suddenly nervous in a way I hadn't been since my 20s. "Martha," he began, his voice soft in the darkness. "I've been wanting to tell you. These past months working with you have been the best I've had in years." "For me too," I admitted. "I find myself looking forward to seeing you every day. And not just because you're a brilliant business partner." He squeezed my hand gently. "I'm wondering if you might consider having dinner with me. Not takeout in the office. A real dinner, just the two of us." The invitation hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately. Another part hesitated, concerned about complicating our business relationship, about what it would mean to open my heart again after Harold. "I'd like that," I heard myself say. "Very much." His smile was visible even in the dim light. "Saturday? I know a wonderful Italian place on Maple Street." Saturday sounds perfect. As I drove home, my mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions. Excitement about this new development with Daniel. Guilt about feeling that excitement, as if I were somehow betraying Harold's memory. Anxiety about navigating a romantic relationship at 62, after 35 years of marriage to one man. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd talked myself into and out of the dinner date at least 3 times. But when I entered my quiet house, I was struck by how empty it felt after the energetic companionship of the studio. Harold had been gone for 3 years. He wouldn't want me to spend the rest of my life alone. I called Dorothy, despite the late hour. "He asked you out," she practically squealed when I told her about Daniel's invitation. "Martha, that's wonderful." "Is it? We're business partners. What if it doesn't work out?" "What if it does?" she countered. "You deserve happiness, Martha. And from everything you've told me about Daniel, he sounds like a good man." "He is," I agreed. "Thoughtful, intelligent, passionate about his work. Not to mention single, age, appropriate, and clearly smitten with you." "Dorothy!" "Well, it's true. And when was the last time you went on a proper date?" I had to think about it. Harold and I went to the symphony last. No, that was 4 years ago, before he got sick. Exactly my point. It's time, Martha. Harold would be the first to say so. After we hung up, I went to my bedroom and opened the closet, pushing past my everyday clothes to the section I rarely touched, dresses and outfits from my life with Harold. Clothes for special occasions that hadn't arisen since his passing. Would any of them still fit? Would they look hopelessly outdated? Saturday arrived with a flutter of anticipation I hadn't felt in decades. I'd settled on a deep blue dress with a flattering neckline, paired with a silver necklace Harold had given me for our 25th anniversary. A nod to my past as I stepped into this new future. Daniel picked me up at 7, looking distinguished in a charcoal suit. His appreciative gaze as I opened the door made me glad I'd taken extra care with my appearance. "You look beautiful, Martha," he said simply. The restaurant was intimate and elegant, with white tablecloths and soft lighting. Over antipasto and wine, our conversation flowed easily from business to personal histories. I told him about meeting Harold in college, about our early years struggling to make ends meet while Michael was small, about building our life together. "He sounds like a remarkable man," Daniel said. "You must miss him terribly." "I do," I admitted, "but differently now than at first. The grief has evolved, I suppose. It's become part of me rather than consuming me." Daniel nodded in understanding. "That's how it was with Eleanor. The first year after she passed, I could barely function. The second year was about learning to live with the absence. Now, I honor her memory by living fully. She'd be furious if I spent the rest of my life in mourning. Harold would feel the same, I said, smiling at the thought. He was always pushing me to try new things, to step outside my comfort zone. Like buying into a photography studio. Daniel's eyes twinkled. Exactly like that. As the evening progressed, I felt layers of reserve falling away. By the time we shared tiramisu for dessert, Daniel's hand had found mine across the table, and I was conscious of a connection that went beyond business partnership or even friendship. When he walked me to my door at the end of the evening, the moment I'd both anticipated and dreaded arrived. Daniel hesitated, then leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't want to. His kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then more confident as I responded. It had been so long since I'd been kissed like this, like I was desirable, like I mattered as a woman, not just as a mother or grandmother or widow. I've been wanting to do that for weeks, he confessed when we finally parted. I'm glad you waited, I said, and I'm glad you didn't wait any longer. We agreed to take things slowly, mindful of our business relationship and the complexities of beginning a romance in our 60s. But as I closed my door behind him, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of possibility, of doors opening rather than closing. The following week at the studio, our new dynamic added a subtle undercurrent to our work interactions. Nothing inappropriate, we were both too professional for that, but there were shared glances, brief touches, private smiles that spoke of our evolving relationship. Layla, perceptive despite her youth, picked up on the change immediately. Something's different with you two, she observed one afternoon as we prepared for a session. You're both like glowing or something. Daniel and I exchanged looks. We're just pleased with how the business is going, he said diplomatically. Layla rolled her eyes. Right, that's definitely it. Our new photo restoration service was launched with a small reception at the studio, inviting existing clients to learn about preserving their family photographs. The response was enthusiastic, particularly from older clients who had shoeboxes full of fading memories. One such client was Eleanor Simmons, an elegant woman in her 70s, who brought in 3 albums of deteriorating photographs dating back to the 1940s. These were my parents and grandparents, she explained as I carefully turned the brittle pages. No one in the family seems interested in them, but I can't bear to think of all these memories being lost. I understood her concern completely. We can digitize these, restore any damage, and create both digital and physical archives that will last for generations. As I examined the albums, I was struck by the historical value of the image's everyday life in our town over decades, faces and places long changed or gone. An idea began to form. Mrs. Simmons, have you ever considered that these photographs might have historical significance beyond your family? She looked surprised. I hadn't thought of it that way. Our town historical society might be very interested in these as documentation of local history. I turned to a page showing a downtown street scene from the 1950s. See how much has changed? These are valuable historical records. By the end of our consultation, Mrs. Simmons had not only commissioned us to restore her family photos, but also agreed to allow copies of historically significant images to be shared with the Historical Society. That evening, I shared my thoughts with Daniel. What if we expanded the restoration service to include a community history component? We could partner with the Historical Society, help preserve the visual history of the town. Daniel's eyes lit up. A community archive project. It could be a significant contribution to local history and good publicity for the studio. More than publicity, I insisted. It would be meaningful work, preserving stories that might otherwise be lost. The idea energized me. I contacted the Historical Society the next day and arranged a meeting with their director, Harriet Klein. She was immediately enthusiastic about the potential collaboration. "We've wanted to digitize our photo archives for years," she explained during our meeting at the Society's small office. "But we lack the expertise and equipment. A partnership with Bellamy Studios would be invaluable." We outlined a plan. The Historical Society would provide access to their existing photo archives, while Bellamy Studios would offer technical expertise, equipment, and a platform for community members to contribute their own historical photographs. The resulting digital archive would be accessible to researchers and the public alike. As we were finalizing the details, Harriet mentioned something that caught my attention. "Of course, we'd want to include the Bellamy collection as well. That's one of our most significant photographic resources." I glanced at Daniel, who looked suddenly uncomfortable. "The Bellamy collection?" "Yes," Harriet continued, seemingly oblivious to Daniel's reaction. "Your father's work documenting the town from the 1940s through the 70s. The Historical Society has some of his images, but I understand you have the complete archive." I turned to Daniel, surprised. "Your father was a photographer too?" He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Thomas Bellamy. He founded the original studio in 1942. This was the first I'd heard of Daniel's father being the founder. He'd told me he'd bought the studio from someone named Grimshaw. The Bellamy collection is a treasure trove of local history," Harriet continued enthusiastically, "especially the work documenting the urban renewal project in the 60s. So many buildings and entire neighborhoods were lost." Daniel stood abruptly. "I'm afraid I have another appointment. Martha can continue discussing the details with you." Before I could respond, he had gathered his things and was heading for the door, leaving me confused and concerned. I finished the meeting with Harriet as professionally as I could, agreeing to continue discussions about the partnership while sidestepping further questions about the Bellamy collection. When I returned to the studio, Daniel was in the darkroom, a space he retreated to when he wanted solitude. I hesitated outside the door, then knocked gently. "Daniel, can we talk?" There was a long pause before he responded. "Not now, Martha. I need some time." I respected his request, though it left me unsettled. That evening, he left without our usual end-of-day conversation, merely saying he'd see me tomorrow. I drove home puzzled and a little hurt by his abrupt change in demeanor. What about his father's photography had triggered such a reaction? And why had he never mentioned that the studio had been in his family for generations? The next morning, Daniel arrived at the studio looking tired, as if he hadn't slept well. He approached my desk with a cup of coffee, a peace offering. "I owe you an explanation," he said quietly, "about yesterday." "You don't owe me anything," I replied, though I was eager to understand what had happened. "But I'm here if you want to talk about it." He sighed, sitting down across from me. My father was indeed a photographer, a very good one, but our relationship was complicated. I waited, giving him space to continue at his own pace. He was brilliant behind the camera, but difficult in person, demanding, critical, especially of me. Nothing I did was ever good enough. Daniel's hands tightened around his coffee cup. When I showed interest in photography, he was merciless in his criticism of my early work. "That must have been painful," I said softly. "It was, but I was determined to prove myself. I worked for other photographers, developed my own style. When he died, I was 28. I expected to inherit the studio." His expression darkened. Instead, he left it to his assistant, Robert Grimshaw, with a note saying he didn't trust me to maintain the Bellamy standards. I reached across the desk to touch his hand. "Daniel, I'm so sorry." It was the final rejection. I left town, worked in Chicago for years, built a reputation there. When I heard Grimshaw was retiring and selling the studio, I came back and bought it. Reclaimed my family legacy in a way. And the Bellamy collection that Harriet mentioned? My father's negatives and prints, boxes and boxes of them, documenting this town for decades. Grimshaw gave them to me when I bought the studio. I've never gone through them. Too many memories. Too much pain. I understood now why he'd reacted so strongly at the Historical Society. The Community Archive Project would mean confronting that history. He nodded. Exactly. Part of me wants to preserve his work. It is historically valuable, and despite everything, he was talented. But another part doesn't want to revisit the hurt I finished for him. Yes. He looked up at me, his expression vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. I've never told anyone the full story. Not even Eleanor knew all of it. The trust implicit in his confession touched me deeply. Thank you for sharing it with me. We don't have to proceed with the Historical Society partnership if it's too difficult. Of course. Whatever you need. The next Saturday, we met at the studio, not for work, but to begin the process of sorting through Thomas Bellamy's photographic legacy. Daniel led me to a storage room I'd never entered, unlocking it to reveal stacks of boxes labeled by year and subject. I've never had the courage to really look through these, he admitted as we carried the first few boxes to a large table in Studio 2. Opening the boxes was like stepping back in time. Thomas Bellamy had methodically documented the town's evolution, storefronts that no longer existed, parades and civic events, construction projects that transformed neighborhoods. These are extraordinary, I said, carefully examining a series of prints showing the town square in the 1950s. Your father had a remarkable eye for composition. Daniel nodded, his expression a complex mix of pride and old pain. He did. That was never in question. As we worked through the boxes, I began to see patterns in Thomas Bellamy's work, his interest in architectural details, his skill at capturing candid moments of everyday life, his documentation of the town's changing landscape. In a box from 1967, we found a series of photographs documenting the urban renewal project that Harriet had mentioned. They show the demolition of an entire neighborhood to make way for new development, old Victorian homes being torn down, families moving their belongings, bulldozers clearing land. This is the Reynolds development, I realized, recognizing the area, where Michael and Veronica live now. Daniel looked more closely at the images. You're right, before it was an upscale subdivision, it was a working-class neighborhood called West Side. As we continued through the photographs, a particular image caught my attention, a stately Victorian house with a distinctive turret, surrounded by moving trucks. A family stood on the porch, looking devastated as workers carried furniture out. This house is beautiful, I commented. Such a shame it was demolished. I turned the print over. In neat handwriting was written, Reynolds Acquisition, West Side, June 12, 1967, Williams family eviction. Williams, my maiden name. Williams family? I repeated, a strange feeling coming over me. Daniel, my parents lost their home during the urban renewal project. I was 7 years old. I remember moving, but not much else about it. Daniel looked at me sharply. This could be your family, Martha. I studied the photograph more carefully. The man on the porch was tall and thin, like my father had been. The woman beside him held a little girl's hand. With a shock of recognition, I realized I was looking at my own parents and myself as a child on one of the worst days of our lives. It is us, I whispered. That's my parents. That's me. Daniel placed a gentle hand on my shoulder as I stared at this unexpected glimpse into my past. Memories began to surface, the beautiful staircase I used to slide down on a pillow when my parents weren't looking, the window seat in my bedroom where I'd read for hours, the garden where my mother grew roses. We loved that house, I said softly. It had been in my father's family for generations. After we lost it, we moved to a small apartment across town. My parents never recovered financially. My father had to take a second job. My mother, who'd never worked outside the home, became a waitress. As I spoke, I remembered more details: overheard arguments about money, my parents' growing bitterness, the way our family life had changed after the move. The notation says Reynolds acquisition, Daniel pointed out. Reynolds as in Veronica's family, I confirmed, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. Her father was a developer, Reynolds Construction. I sat down heavily, the photograph still in my hands. Veronica's family business forced mine out of our home, and now she's living in the subdivision built where our neighborhood once stood. The irony was almost too much to comprehend. For years, I'd felt Veronica's subtle disdain, her treatment of me as somehow less sophisticated, less accomplished, less worthy of being featured in a family portrait. And all this time, her family's wealth had been built partly on the displacement of mine. Did she ever mention this to you? Daniel asked. About her family's involvement in the urban renewal project? Never. She talks about her father being a visionary developer who transformed the town, but she's never acknowledged the cost of that transformation to families like mine. I looked up at Daniel, a new understanding dawning. This is why my parents were always uncomfortable around the Reynolds family. They knew exactly who had profited from our loss. Daniel carefully sorted through more photographs from the same period, finding additional images of the West Side neighborhood's demolition. Your family wasn't the only one affected. Dozens of homes were torn down. All working-class families, I noted, examining the images. All replaced by upscale homes for wealthy newcomers. The discovery left me shaken. Not just the unexpected glimpse of my childhood home and family, but the connection to Veronica, connection she must have been aware of, but had never acknowledged. What will you do with this information? Daniel asked gently. I stared at the photograph of my 7-year-old self, watching as strangers carried away our belongings. I don't know yet, but I can't pretend I don't know it now. We spent the rest of the afternoon carefully organizing and cataloging Thomas Bellamy's urban renewal photographs. Despite my personal connection to the images, I could recognize their historical importance. They documented a significant, if painful, period in the town's development. These should be part of the Historical Society's archive, I said finally. People should know what was lost, whose lives were disrupted. Daniel nodded. I agree. And the rest of my father's work as well. It's time to bring it all into the light. As we locked up the studio that evening, I felt both emotionally drained and strangely energized. The discovery of my family's connection to the Reynolds development had awakened old memories and new questions. Will you talk to Veronica about what you've found? Daniel asked, as we stood beside my car. I need to process it first, I said. But yes, eventually. This isn't something I can just ignore. He pulled me into a gentle embrace. Whatever you decide, I'm here for you. I leaned into his strength, grateful for his support. Thank you for sharing your father's photographs with me, even though it was difficult for you. Maybe it was meant to be, he said softly. Maybe his work was preserved all these years, so that you could find this piece of your history. As I drove home, my mind was filled with images: my childhood home with its beautiful turret, my parents' devastated expressions, the bulldozers that had erased our neighborhood. And overlaid on these was the image of Veronica in her elegant house in the Reynolds development, built on land that had once belonged to families like mine. The monthly Sunday dinner at Michael and Veronica's house was the next day. I considered canceling, needing more time to process my discovery. But another part of me felt an urgent need to see their house, my son's house, with new eyes, knowing what had stood there before. I arrived at their door with my customary apple pie and an uncommon heaviness in my heart. The Reynolds development, with its curved streets and large setback homes, had always seemed pleasant enough to me. Now I saw it as a monument to displacement, to the prioritization of profit over people's lives and histories. Veronica greeted me at the door, polished as always. "Martha, come in. Michael's just firing up the grill." I stepped into their spacious foyer, looking around with new awareness. Somewhere near here, perhaps exactly here, my childhood home had stood. The home where my parents had expected to live out their lives, where they had planned to pass on a legacy to me, just as the house had been passed to my father. "Is everything all right?" Veronica asked, noticing my distraction. "You seem a bit off." I met her gaze, wondering what she knew, what family stories she'd heard about the development of this neighborhood. "I'm fine," I said, managing a smile. "Just lost in thought about a project at the studio." But as I followed her into the kitchen, the photograph of my family's eviction was vivid in my mind. And I knew that sooner or later I would have to confront Veronica with this shared history that only one of us had been privileged enough to ignore. The discovery of my family's connection to the Reynolds development haunted me in the days that followed. I found myself lying awake at night, remembering details of our old Victorian home that I hadn't thought about in decades: the creak of the third stair, the way sunlight filtered through the stained glass window on the landing, the smell of my mother's bread baking in the kitchen. I also remembered the aftermath of our eviction: my father's deepening silence, my mother's quiet tears when she thought I was asleep, the shame of moving from our spacious home to a cramped apartment where the neighbors complained if I played too loudly. At the studio, Daniel and I continued sorting through Thomas Bellamy's photographs, organizing them for the Historical Society archive. Each image of the West Side neighborhood stirred more memories, filling in gaps in my understanding of what had happened to my family and others like us. The more I look at these, the more I realize this wasn't just about progress. I told Daniel one evening as we examined a series showing the systematic demolition of the neighborhood, this was about erasing one community to create another. Daniel nodded, studying an image of bulldozers clearing land where homes had stood just days earlier. My father may have been difficult personally, but he understood the power of photographic documentation. He was preserving a history that the developers probably hoped would be forgotten. In one box, we discovered newspaper clippings that Thomas Bellamy had collected alongside his photographs. One headline caught my attention: "Reynolds faces opposition to West Side Project." The article detailed a contentious town council meeting where residents, including my father, had protested the use of eminent domain to force them from their homes. "The council claims this area is blighted," my father was quoted as saying, "but these are well-maintained family homes, some dating back a century. This isn't about improving the town, it's about replacing working people with wealthy ones." Another article reported that despite the protests, the council had voted 4-1 to approve the project. A photograph showed Gerald Reynolds, Veronica's father, shaking hands with the mayor after the vote. "Your father was brave to speak up," Daniel commented. "He was," I agreed, feeling a surge of pride mixed with sadness. "But it cost him. After we lost the house, something in him seemed to break. He never fought for anything again." The more I learned, the more I felt a growing need to confront Veronica with this shared history, not out of vengeance, but because the truth deserved acknowledgement. The erasure of my family's story, and the stories of all the families displaced by the Reynolds development, felt like a second injustice layered upon the first. I decided to approach the conversation carefully, choosing a time when Michael would be present as well. The opportunity came when they invited me to dinner the following week to celebrate their wedding anniversary. "Just the three of us," Michael said when he called with the invitation. "The kids will be at friends' houses. Veronica's booked a table at Marcello's." Marcello's was the most expensive restaurant in town. the kind of place where Veronica would be sure to run into her real estate colleagues and social connections. It was the perfect setting for the conversation I needed to haven neutral territory, but with enough privacy at a corner table for a difficult discussion. I dressed with particular care that evening, choosing a burgundy dress that projected confidence and composure. I brought the photograph of my family's eviction in my purse, along with copies of the newspaper articles. Michael picked me up, as we had arranged to meet Veronica at the restaurant after her showing of a luxury property. During the drive, he was in high spirits, talking about Jake's baseball team and Emma's interest in photography. "She's been asking if she can intern at the studio next summer," he mentioned. "I think your new career has made quite an impression on her." "I'd love to have her," I said, genuinely pleased despite my preoccupation with the coming conversation. She has a good eye. At the restaurant, Veronica was already seated at a corner table, looking elegant in a black dress, her blonde hair swept up in a sophisticated twist. She air-kissed my cheek as I sat down. "Martha, you look nice," she said, her standard greeting that always felt more like an assessment than a compliment. "Thank you. Happy anniversary to you both." A waiter appeared with champagne that Veronica had already ordered. "To 15 years," she said, raising her glass, "and many more." We clinked glasses, and I took a small sip, needing to keep my head clear. Through the appetizer course, I let the conversation flow naturally, waiting for the right moment. It came during a lull after our main courses arrived. "I've been working on an interesting project at the studio," I began. "We're partnering with the Historical Society to digitize and preserve photographs documenting the town's history." "That sounds worthwhile," Michael said. "What kind of photographs?" "All sorts: civic events, architectural changes, daily life across decades." Daniel's father was quite a prolific photographer from the 1940s through the 70s. Veronica nodded politely, but I could tell the topic didn't particularly interest her. "We've been focusing recently on the urban renewal period in the 60s. I continued, watching her face carefully. "Specifically, the development of what's now called the Reynolds subdivision." Something flickered in Veronica's eyes, a momentary wariness, but her expression remained pleasant. "My father's signature project. It transformed that part of town." "It certainly did," I agreed. "It completely erased what was there before the West Side neighborhood." Michael was looking between us, sensing the shift in the conversation's tone. "Mom, is there something specific about this project that interests you?" I reached into my purse and removed the photograph, placing it on the table between us. This was taken on June 12, 1967. The day my family was evicted from our home to make way for the Reynolds development. Silence fell over the table as they both stared at the image me devastated parents, my 7-year-old self clutching a stuffed bear, the moving trucks being loaded with our possessions. "That's you?" Michael asked, his voice hushed with shock. "Grandma and Grandpa?" I nodded. Our home had been in the family for 3 generations. My great-grandfather built it in 1889. It was at 723 Elm Street, which doesn't exist anymore. Veronica's face had gone very still. "I had no idea that was your family's home." "Didn't you?" I asked quietly. "Your father's company kept meticulous records of the properties they acquired. The Williams name would have been on the documents." She flushed slightly. "I wasn't involved in my father's business dealings from 55 years ago, Martha. I was born in 1975, well after the development was completed. But you knew the neighborhood that had been there was demolished. You knew families were forced out." "It was urban renewal," she said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "The area was designated for redevelopment by the town council." "It was our home," I said simply, "and the homes of dozens of other families, working people who couldn't afford to fight the eminent domain declarations in court." Michael was still staring at the photograph. "Mom, you never talked about this, all these years." "It was too painful." I admitted. Your grandparents rarely spoke of it either. The loss broke something in them, not just the house itself, but the security, the legacy they'd planned to pass on. I placed the newspaper clippings on the table as well. Your grandfather spoke out against the project. I told Michael. He tried to organize the neighborhood to resist, but in the end, money and political connections won out. Veronica's composure was cracking slightly. I don't understand why you're bringing this up now after all these years. What does this have to do with us, with our anniversary dinner? Because history matters, I said. Because the erasure of what happened to families like mine is part of a pattern that continues. Because I've spent 15 years being subtly reminded that I don't quite belong in your world, Veronica, when the truth is that your family's position was built partly on the displacement of mine. Michael looked stricken. Mom, that's not fair. Veronica has always. Has always what, Michael? I interrupted gently. Always made me feel fully welcome. Always treated me as an equal. Always included me as a full member of this family. He fell silent, unable to complete his defense. Veronica's face had flushed deeper. This is about the family portrait, isn't it? You're still upset about that, so you've dug up ancient history to make me look bad. No, I said firmly. I discovered this connection by accident, through Daniel's father's photographs, but once I knew, I couldn't unknow it. And I couldn't continue pretending that the dynamics in our family exist in a vacuum, separate from this history. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I'm not asking for apologies for things that happened before you were born, Veronica. I'm asking for acknowledgement of this history, and of how it might have shaped the way you see me, the way you've positioned me in this family. The table fell silent again. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant evening service, other diners laughing and talking, unaware of the painful history being excavated at our corner table. Finally, Michael spoke. I had no idea, Mom, about the house, about Grandpa trying to fight it. They never said a word to me. They were ashamed, I explained, not of their actions, but of their failure to protect what should have been your inheritance too. By the time you were born, they'd decided it was better to look forward than back. Veronica was staring at the photograph, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. My father always presented the Reynolds development as his greatest achievement. He talked about transforming an underutilized area into a community of distinction. Those were his words. She looked up at me. He never mentioned the families who had lived there, who lost their homes. Most people who profit from others' losses prefer not to dwell on that part of the story, I said, not unkindly. I'm not my father, she said, a defensive edge returning to her voice. No, you're not. But you've benefited from his actions, just as I've carried the consequences of what happened to my parents. I gathered the photograph and clippings, returning them to my purse. I didn't bring this up to ruin your anniversary. I brought it up because truth matters, and because I'm tired of being made to feel less than in this family. Michael reached across the table to take my hand. Mom, I never meant for you to feel that way. Never. I know you didn't. I assured him. But you allowed it to happen, just as the town council allowed the West Side neighborhood to be erased, because it was easier not to challenge the status quo. The remainder of the dinner was subdued. We managed polite conversation about safer topics, but the weight of what had been revealed hung over the table. When we finished, Michael insisted on driving me home, despite Veronica's tight-lipped suggestion that they should continue their anniversary evening as planned. In the car, he was quiet for several minutes before speaking. I should have stood up for you more, with the family portrait, with other things over the years. Yes, I agreed, not offering easy absolution. You should have. I didn't want to rock the boat. Veronica can be difficult when she feels challenged. I'm aware, I said dryly. But Michael, sometimes boats need rocking. Sometimes the smooth surface hides dangerous currents underneath. He nodded, his profile in the darkness reminding me so much of Harold that my heart ached. What happens now? That depends partly on Veronica, on whether she's willing to acknowledge this history and how it might have influenced her attitudes. And partly on you, and whether you're willing to insist on a family dynamic where I'm fully included and respected. When we reached my house, he turned to face me. I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it. I know you are. I leaned over to kiss his cheek. I love you, Michael. That hasn't changed. Inside my quiet house, I felt drained, but also strangely liberated. The truth that had been buried for decades was finally in the open. Whatever happened next, I would no longer be carrying the weight of that unacknowledged history alone. I called Daniel, needing to share the evening's events with someone who would understand their significance. How did it go? He asked. About as well as could be expected, I said, kicking off my shoes and settling onto the sofa. Michael was shocked. Veronica was defensive at first then. I'm not sure. Subdued, maybe. It's a lot for them to process. And for you, he pointed out. How are you feeling? I considered the question. Lighter. Like I've set down something heavy I've been carrying for a very long time. I'm proud of you, Martha. It takes courage to confront painful history like that. I had help, I reminded him. Your father's photographs gave me the evidence I needed. Maybe that's why he documented everything so meticulously, so the truth would be preserved, even when people wanted it forgotten. After we hung up, I sat in my living room looking at old family photographs, the few we'd managed to save from our life before the eviction, and the many taken after, documenting birthdays, graduations, Michael's wedding, my grandchildren's births. Through it all, I could see the thread of resilience that had carried us forward despite the losses. The next morning, I arrived at the studio early, eager to continue our work on the historical archive. Daniel was already there, sorting through another box of his father's photographs. I found something I think you should see, he said, handing me a large envelope. Inside was a series of photographs taken at what appeared to be a town council meeting. One image showed my father standing at a podium, his expression intense as he addressed the council. Another captured a group of West Side residents holding handmade signs, "Homes Not Profits" and "Save Our Neighborhood." Your father was there, Daniel said, documenting the resistance, not just the demolition. The knowledge that Thomas Bellamy had considered this fight important enough to record gave me a new appreciation for his work. He may have been a difficult father, but as a photographer, he understood the power of bearing witness. We spent the morning organizing these additional images for the Historical Society exhibit. Around noon, the studio door chimed. I looked up to see Veronica standing in the reception area, looking less polished than usual in jeans and a simple blouse. Martha, she said, her voice uncertain. Do you have a moment to talk? Daniel caught my eye, silently offering to give us privacy. I nodded, and he disappeared into the darkroom. Of course, I said, gesturing to the small seating area where we normally met with clients. Veronica sat down, her usual confidence noticeably absent. I didn't sleep much last night. I kept thinking about what you showed us, about your family's home. I waited, giving her space to continue. I called my mother this morning, asked her about the West Side neighborhood, about the families who had lived there. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. She admitted that my father knew exactly whose homes he was taking, that there was a file on each family, including financial assessments of how much they could afford to fight the eminent domain declarations. The calculated nature of it made my stomach turn, but I wasn't surprised. They targeted neighborhoods where residents had limited resources to resist. Yes, Veronica met my eyes directly for perhaps the first time in our relationship. My father specifically noted which families had legal connections, political influence, or financial means. Those who didn't were prioritized for acquisition. Like my parents, I said, a librarian and a high school teacher. She nodded, looking down at her hands. I've always been proud of my family's success, of the Reynolds name. I never questioned how that success was achieved. Most privileged people don't, I said, not harshly but truthfully. I can see that now. She looked around the studio, taking in the photographs on display, the equipment, the space that I now co-owned. I underestimated you, Martha. From the beginning, I saw you as less sophisticated, less ambitious than my family. Less worthy, I supplied. Yes, she admitted. And I was wrong. Not just morally wrong, but factually wrong. Your family had a legacy too on that was taken from you. Her acknowledgement, unexpected and unforced, moved me more than I had anticipated. Thank you for saying that. I can't undo what my father did, she continued. And I can't pretend I haven't benefited from it, but I can acknowledge the truth, and I can work to be more conscious of how I've perpetuated those attitudes. That's all I've ever wanted, I told her. Not guilt or reparations, just recognition of this shared history and how it has shaped our family dynamics. She nodded, then reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I brought something. My mother found it in my father's files. Inside was a black and white photograph of my family's Victorian home, taken before the demolition. It showed the house in its full glory, intricate gingerbread trim, the wraparound porch, the distinctive turret with its stained glass windows. It was beautiful, Veronica said softly. It was, I agreed, my throat tight with emotion. Thank you for bringing this. She hesitated. The Historical Society is planning a fundraising gala next month. As a Reynolds, I'm on the committee. We're focusing on local history, and I'd like to propose featuring the West Side neighborhood documentation as our centerpiece exhibit, with proper acknowledgement of the families who lost their homes. The offer represented a significant shift from erasure to recognition, from denial to acknowledgement. I think that would be very appropriate, I said. Daniel and I have been organizing his father's photographs for just such a purpose. I know it doesn't change what happened, Veronica added, but perhaps it helps ensure the full story is told, not just the version that benefits the powerful. After she left, Daniel emerged from the darkroom. That sounded positive, he observed. It was, I confirmed, showing him the photograph of my childhood home. More than I expected, honestly. People can surprise you, he said, putting an arm around my shoulders, when given the opportunity to face uncomfortable truths. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity as we prepared the West Side neighborhood photographs for the Historical Society exhibit. Harriet Klein was thrilled with the collection and equally excited about Veronica's proposal to feature it at the fundraising gala. This is exactly the kind of local history that needs preservation, she said as we reviewed the curated selection. Not just the official narrative, but the experiences of ordinary people affected by development decisions. Working alongside Veronica on the exhibit committee created a new dynamic between us, not exactly friendship, but a mutual respect that had been missing before. She approached the project with genuine commitment, insisting that the exhibit include not just photographs, but also oral histories from surviving former residents of the neighborhood. My father documented the physical transformation, Daniel explained as we set up the display panels. But the human stories are equally important. The evening of the gala arrived with perfect early autumn weather. The Historical Society's modest building had been transformed with elegant lighting and floral arrangements. Community leaders, donors, and history enthusiasts filled the space, cocktails in hand as they waited for the exhibit to be unveiled. I wore the deep purple dress for my portrait session, feeling it appropriate for this moment of personal and community acknowledgement. Daniel, handsome in a charcoal suit, stayed close by my side, his presence a steady support. Harriet welcomed everyone and introduced Veronica as the committee chair. Veronica stepped to the podium, poised in a simple black dress that conveyed appropriate seriousness for the occasion. "Thank you all for coming tonight to support the preservation of our town's history," she began. "The exhibit we're unveiling, Before Reynolds, the Lost Neighborhood of Westside, documents an important chapter in our community's development tone that has been overlooked in official histories." She paused, her gaze finding me in the crowd. "The Reynolds name is associated with progress and development in this town. My father's vision transformed neighborhoods and created new opportunities. But that transformation came at a cost to the families who called Westside home, families who were displaced to make way for what would become the Reynolds subdivision." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the usual celebratory tone of such events. "Among those families," Veronica continued, "was that of my mother-in-law, Martha Williams. Her childhood home, which had been in her family for 3 generations, was one of those demolished in 1967. All eyes turned toward me. I stood straight, accepting their attention with dignity rather than discomfort. Through the remarkable photographs of Thomas Bellamy, preserved by his son Daniel and now co-owner of Bellamy Studios, we can see what was lost, not just buildings, but a community. I invite you all to view the exhibit with open hearts and a willingness to confront our town's complete history, not just the parts that make us comfortable. As the curtain was drawn back to reveal the exhibit, I felt a complex surge of emotions: vindication that this history was finally being acknowledged, gratitude for Daniel's father's work in preserving it, and a bittersweet sense of closure for the little girl who had watched her home being taken away. The centerpiece of the exhibit was a large print of my family's Victorian home, paired with a contemporary photograph of the Reynolds subdivision house that now stood approximately where it had been. Beside these images was the photograph of my family's eviction day, with a plaque that identified 7-year-old Martha Williams, now co-owner of Bellamy Studios. Throughout the evening, people approached me with questions, expressions of sympathy, and sometimes confessions of their own family's involvement in the urban renewal project. I answered them all with composure, neither minimizing the injustice nor dwelling in bitterness. "You're the star of the evening," Daniel murmured as we finally found a quiet moment together. "Not me," I corrected him. "The truth is the star, finally seeing the light after all these years." Michael arrived late, having had to attend a work function first. He made his way through the crowd to where I stood with Daniel. "Mom," he said, embracing me, "this is incredible. The exhibit, Veronica's speech, all of it." "It's been quite an evening," I agreed. "I'm sorry I wasn't more supportive from the beginning," he said. "When you first discovered the connection, I should have understood what it meant to you." "You understand now," I said simply. "That's what matters." As the evening wound down, Veronica approached us, looking tired but satisfied with the event's success. "Thank you," she said to me, "for pushing me to see beyond my family's narrative. It couldn't have been easy to confront me with this history." "It wasn't," I admitted, "but necessary things rarely are." She nodded, then surprised me by asking, "Would you be willing to do another family portrait session? All of us together, as it should have been the first time." The request and the acknowledgement embedded within it felt like the final piece falling into place. "I'd like that very much," I said. Later that night, as Daniel walked me to my door, the autumn air crisp around us, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me for decades. "You've accomplished something remarkable," he said. "Not just the exhibit, but the healing it represents for you, for your family, for the community." "We accomplished it," I corrected him. "Your father's photographs, your willingness to confront your own painful history, your support through all of this, I couldn't have done it without you." Under the porch light, His face was both familiar and wonderfully new face of a man who had become essential to my life in ways I hadn't imagined possible 6 months earlier. "Martha," he said softly, taking both my hands in his, "I've been thinking about the future. About us." My heart quickened. "What about us?" "I love you," he said simply. "These past months working together, building something meaningful, facing difficult truths, they've shown me what a remarkable woman you are. And I find myself hoping that our partnership might extend beyond the studio." "Are you proposing?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it. "I am." His eyes crinkled with warmth. "Not to replace what you had with Harold, or what I had with Eleanor, but to create something new, something that honors our pasts while building a future together." Joy bubbled up within me, unexpected and overwhelming. At 62, I had found not just a new career and a new sense of purpose, but a new loved one based on mutual respect, shared values, and the wisdom that comes only with age and experience. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and sure. "Yes, I would like that very much." As he gathered me into his arms, I thought of the journey that had brought me here, from the little girl losing her home, to the widow seeking purpose, to the woman who had reclaimed her place in her family's story and found unexpected happiness in the process. The studio that had once been the site of my exclusion had become the foundation of my new beginning. And the photographs that had documented a painful history had also illuminated a path forward, one where truth, however difficult, made space for healing and new possibilities. Daniel's kiss was gentle, a promise of the life we would build together, and as I returned it, I felt the last pieces of my heart's puzzle falling perfectly into place.